Karen believed in rules. Not the kind that kept society running smoothly, but the kind that gave her absolute power over every inch of the neighborhood. As the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, she patrolled the streets with an iron will and a clipboard, wielding violation notices like a warlord handing down decrees. Property values weren't just a concern to her, they were a sacred cause, and she was their fiercest protector. Her presence was impossible to ignore. Dressed in her signature fleece vest and khaki slacks, her neatly trimmed bob barely moving as she stomped through the cul-de-sacs, she scrutinized everything: the height of grass blades, the exact shade of beige on front doors, the number of cars parked in a driveway. Nothing escaped her gaze. Over the years, she had crafted an exhaustive list of regulations, each more absurd than the last. Flower beds had to be filled with HOA-approved colors, no exceptions. Trash bins left out more than 10 minutes past collection time. Expect a fine. Holiday decorations? Permitted for exactly 2 weeks, and only in white lights. Any violation of these sacred laws resulted in swift, merciless penalties. Most homeowners tolerated Karen's antics with an exasperated eye roll, occasionally grumbling in hushed voices about her unrelenting tyranny. But lately, Karen's paranoia had reached new heights. She was convinced that outsiders were infiltrating her beloved community. Strangers, delivery drivers, teenagers cutting through the neighborhood, each was a potential threat to the order she had so meticulously built. The final straw came when she spotted a pizza delivery driver taking a shortcut through the neighborhood. To Karen, this wasn't just a harmless detour, it was a security crisis. What if criminals followed suit? What if unregistered vehicles began lurking on her pristine streets? What if, God forbid, someone parked overnight without permission? The very thought sent her into a spiral of righteous indignation. Determined to restore order, Karen devised her most extreme plan yet. If she couldn't trust residents to follow the rules, she would make it physically impossible for outsiders to enter. Her solution? DIY barricades. Roadblocks. A fortress of flower pots and hand-painted signs declaring the neighborhood closed to non-residents. In her mind, this was leadership. This was taking action where others failed. Armed with her ever-present clipboard and an overinflated sense of authority, she summoned the most loyal members of the HOA board to an emergency meeting. With dramatic flair, she outlined her vision: a strategic blockade at both entrances to the neighborhood. The homeowners needed protection. They needed someone like her to stand up and defend their way of life. Do we really want random people using our streets like a public road? She demanded, eyes flashing as she scanned the faces before her. This is about protecting our property values. A few hesitant nods followed. No one wanted to challenge Karen outright, not when she could make their lives hell with a single citation. Within hours, the plan was in motion. Giant planters filled with HOA-approved flowers were dragged into place. Traffic cones, hand-painted with "residents only," were lined up with military precision. And at the very center of it all, a massive homemade sign that read, "Neighborhood closed. No trespassing. Violators will be reported." That night, as Karen watched from her front window, smug satisfaction settled over her like a warm blanket. She had done it. The neighborhood was safe. This was what true leadership looked like. By morning, the effects of Karen's new regime were already rippling through the neighborhood like a slow-building disaster. Residents awoke to find their once accessible streets transformed into an obstacle course of barricades and oversized planters. Delivery drivers sat in their trucks at the entrance, confused, hesitating before eventually turning around. Trash collection was delayed as the garbage trucks, unable to maneuver around the obstructions, idled outside the neighborhood, honking in frustration. The first real confrontation happened before noon. A mother, clutching her toddler's hand, stood at the barricade, arguing with a bewildered rideshare driver who had canceled her trip because he couldn't get through. Another homeowner stormed toward the blockade, phone in hand, recording the scene as he demanded to know who was responsible for this nonsense. Karen watched it all unfold from the comfort of her front porch, cradling a cup of chamomile tea. The rising tension only reassured her that she had made the right decision. These people needed order. They needed someone with the courage to enforce it. When Jack, her longtime adversary and the one man in the neighborhood who had never cowered before her, knocked on her door that afternoon, she was more than ready. The second she opened the door, Jack was already in motion, gesturing toward the barricades with an incredulous laugh. "Karen, what the hell is this?" he demanded. Karen tilted her chin upward. "Security measures, Jack. To protect the community." "Security measures? You blocked off both entrances to the neighborhood. Do you realize how insane that is? If you actually cared about this community, you'd understand," she snapped. Jack pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply. "Karen, how are garbage trucks supposed to get in? Or delivery drivers? Or, hell, anybody who doesn't drive a car you personally approve of?" Karen pursed her lips. "People need to adapt. It's a small price to pay for security." "Security from what? The Amazon driver?" Before she could respond, another neighbor approached, then another, and within minutes, a crowd had gathered. People began airing their grievances all at once. "My babysitter couldn't get through last night. The mailman had to park 2 blocks away to deliver my package. My mom is in a wheelchair, Karen. She had to walk half a mile just to get to my house." Karen remained unfazed. "I'm simply enforcing community standards. If you don't like it, take it up with the HOA." Jack folded his arms. "Karen, we are the HOA. And no one voted for this." A few homeowners, frustrated beyond reason, moved toward the barricades, trying to shift the planters out of the way. But Karen was prepared. With a smug grin, she reached for her clipboard and pulled out a folder thick with paperwork. "I'd advise against that," she said coolly. "Tampering with HOA property comes with fines." Jack took one look at the folder and burst out laughing. "Karen, these are just flower pots from Home Depot. You don't own the street." Karen's smirk only deepened. If anything, the resistance only reinforced her belief that she was the last line of defense against total chaos. She imagined herself as a noble leader, standing strong against an unruly mob. But the real consequences of her actions were already in motion. That night, some rebellious residents took matters into their own hands. Under the cover of darkness, they moved several of the planters, shoving them onto sidewalks to clear a path for vehicles. By morning, Karen, spotting the vandalism from her window, nearly choked on her tea. She stormed outside in her pajamas and fleece vest, huffing and puffing as she dragged the heavy planters back into place. By the time the sun fully rose, her masterpiece had been restored, not that it would last long. When Jack arrived that afternoon with more neighbors, he wasn't empty-handed. "I did some digging," he announced, waving a stack of papers. "And guess what I found?" Karen folded her arms. "I don't have time for your nonsense, Jack." "Oh, you'll want to make time for this," he said. Then, turning to the crowd, he began reading aloud. "Karen's backyard shed is unregistered. Karen's fence is 3 inches too high. Karen's mailbox is the wrong shade of beige." The crowd erupted in laughter. Karen's face burned red. "This is slander," she shrieked. Jack shook his head. "No, Karen. This is your own damn rules. The same ones you've been fining people over for years." Karen clenched her fists. I'll handle my property concerns when the time is right." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But before the neighborhood could fully turn on her, before Jack could call for an official HOA vote against her, an event unfolded that would overshadow everything. That night, Mrs. Mitchell's scream shattered the peace. A sharp, desperate scream shattered the stillness of the night. Mrs. Mitchell stood in her driveway, waving her arms frantically, her voice cutting through the suburban quiet like a siren. "Help! Somebody, please help!" Inside the Mitchell home, her husband, Mr. Mitchell, lay slumped in his recliner, his face pale and drenched in sweat. His chest rose and fell in uneven, struggling gasps, his fingers weakly grasping at the air as though trying to hold on to something unseen. He had suffered from heart problems before, but never like this. This was different. This was worse. With trembling hands, Mrs. Mitchell fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it as she dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, she could barely get the words out. My husband, he's not breathing right. Please. Send help." The dispatcher's voice remained steady, professional. "Ma'am, we have an ambulance en route to your location now. Stay with him. Help is on the way." But help was about to hit a roadblock. 2 miles away, an ambulance sped down the quiet, empty streets, sirens wailing, its crew preparing for a routine emergency response, except nothing about this night would be routine. As they approached the neighborhood entrance, the driver slowed, blinking in confusion. What the hell is this? The road was completely blocked. In front of them stood an absurd mess of oversized planters, wooden barricades, and a giant homemade sign that read, "Neighborhood closed. No trespassing." The paramedic riding in the passenger seat double-checked the GPS, frowning. This has to be the right way. The driver leaned forward, scanning the obstacle in disbelief. Tell me this isn't real. The lead paramedic, Officer Ryan, wasted no time. He jumped out of the vehicle and rushed to one of the massive flower pots, trying to push it aside, but it wouldn't budge. "These things are heavy as hell," he muttered, his frustration mounting. He turned back toward the ambulance, reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, we've got a problem. The road is completely blocked. No way in." Inside the Mitchell house, time was slipping away. Mr. Mitchell's breathing had grown shallower, his skin ashen. His wife clutched his hand, whispering words of comfort even as her own heart pounded with panic. The sirens, where were the sirens? They had stopped. She rushed to the front door, expecting to see flashing lights, paramedics running up the driveway. But when she stepped outside, there was nothing. No ambulance. No responders. Just a cold, empty street. Meanwhile, at the barricade, Officer Ryan's patience had run out. He grabbed his radio again. "Dispatch, we need immediate assistance. Is there another way in?" Negative. The only other entrance had been blocked as well. Then, out of the darkness, a voice cut through the night. "What do you think you're doing, Karen?" She stormed onto the scene, her ever-present clipboard tucked under one arm, dressed in fleece and pajama pants. Her expression was a twisted mask of outrage. "This is HOA property. You can't just move things without authorization." Officer Ryan turned to face her, stunned. "Lady, we have a medical emergency. We need to get through." Karen crossed her arms. If this was a real emergency, they should have planned ahead. There are policies in place. Officer Ryan's jaw clenched. Someone is dying, and you're worried about policies? By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of the neighbors. Jack was the first to arrive, taking in the scene in one furious glance. He didn't wait. "Move it," he ordered, grabbing one of the heavy planters and shoving it aside. Others followed his lead. Within seconds, people were kicking over cones, dragging barricades, tearing through Karen's makeshift roadblock. Karen shrieked. "Stop. That is HOA property. You'll be fined." No one listened. The ambulance roared through the newly opened path, speeding toward the Mitchell house. By the time the paramedics burst through the front door, Mr. Mitchell was barely conscious. His pulse was weak. They worked fast. Oxygen mask. 4 drip. A stretcher was wheeled inside. "We've got a pulse, but it's weak." Mrs. Mitchell stood frozen as they loaded her husband into the ambulance, tears streaking her face. Then, she turned slowly toward Karen, her grief melting into something colder. "You nearly killed my husband." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in years, she didn't have a smug remark, a lecture, or a rule to hide behind. The silence stretched. Then, flashing red and blue lights flooded the street. The police had arrived. Karen's moment of power was crumbling before her eyes. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street in an ominous glow as 2 squad cars rolled to a stop. Neighbors gathered, whispering in hushed tones, their breath visible in the crisp night air. The atmosphere was electric, not with fear, but with anticipation. Karen, however, saw only an opportunity. She marched straight toward the officers, clipboard in hand, eyes blazing with fury. "Finally! You need to arrest them," she snapped, pointing wildly at Jack and the other neighbors who had torn down her barricades. They vandalized HOA property and ignored official security measures. "I want every single one of them fined and removed from the premises immediately." Officer Carter barely looked at her as he pulled out a notepad. "Ma'am, we're responding to reports of an obstruction of emergency services. Are you responsible for these barricades?" Karen blinked. Of course. They were put in place for security reasons, fully within the HOA's authority. Another officer, standing by the remnants of the barricade, let out a low whistle. He turned to his partner and shook his head. "You believe this?" Officer Carter exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Ma'am, you do realize that it's a crime to block emergency vehicles, right?" Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. This is private property. I have every right to control access to the neighborhood. If the ambulance really needed to get through, they should have gone through the proper channels." Jack let out a bitter laugh, stepping forward. "Karen, a man was literally dying while you stood here quoting HOA rules. You almost killed him." Karen squared her shoulders. "I was protecting the community." Officer Carter's patience was wearing thin. "Ma'am, you physically prevented an ambulance from reaching a critically ill patient. That's obstruction of emergency services, which is a serious offense." Karen's confidence faltered, just for a second. "That's ridiculous. I was just..." The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, turn around." Karen froze. Then, she laughed. A high, incredulous sound, as though she genuinely believed this was a joke. You're arresting me?" The click of the handcuffs around her wrists was deafening. Wait, she shrieked, her body twisting as the officers secured her arms behind her back. "I'm the HOA president. I have rights." The crowd erupted, not in outrage, but in cheers. A few neighbors clapped. Someone actually whistled. Jack stood with his arms crossed, watching as the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood was finally dethroned. Karen thrashed as the officers led her toward the patrol car. "This is a mistake. I was enforcing the rules. You'll regret this. All of you." One of the officers opened the back door, guiding her in. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." Karen did not remain silent. She continued to shout as they shut the door behind her, her voice muffled by the glass. Jack, arms still folded, shook his head in amusement. The officers turned to the remaining neighbors. "Anyone else involved in placing these barricades?" Silence. Then, several former HOA board members stepped forward, shaking their heads. We didn't know she'd take it this far," one of them muttered. Another swallowed hard. "We never actually voted on this." She just did it. Jack let out a slow breath, staring at the remnants of the barricades that had nearly cost Mr. Mitchell his life. He turned back toward the officers. So, what happens next? The officer slipped his notepad into his pocket. She'll be booked for obstruction of emergency services. It's not just a fine, it's a criminal charge. Depending on the circumstances, she could be looking at jail time. Jack let the words settle over him, feeling a wave of something close to satisfaction. For years, Karen had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, drowning them in fines, threats, and ridiculous restrictions. But tonight? Tonight, she was finally held accountable. As the squad car pulled away, carrying a furious, handcuffed Karen into the night, the neighbors burst into celebration. A few residents dragged what was left of the barricades into a pile, stomping on them for good measure. Someone popped open a beer. Laughter filled the street. Jack, watching it all unfold, turned to Mrs. Mitchell, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He's going to be okay." She nodded, her eyes glassy but grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. By sunrise, the neighborhood was buzzing, not with frustration, but with a newfound sense of relief. News of Karen's humiliating arrest had spread like wildfire. Within hours, residents were sharing videos of her dramatic meltdown in the community group chat, where she flailed, screamed about her rights, and demanded immediate release. The footage was nothing short of glorious. The remaining HOA board members, now scrambling to distance themselves from her, called an emergency meeting. For the first time in years, residents flooded the clubhouse not in fear, but with purpose. Jack stood before them, his presence commanding. "Let's cut to the chase," he said, arms crossed. "Who here actually supports anything Karen did?" Silence. The board members shifted uncomfortably. "So we can all agree, she's got to go." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. A vote was cast, and within minutes, Karen was officially removed as HOA president. But Jack wasn't done. "For years, we've put up with her ridiculous fines and power trips. Do we really need penalties for the wrong shade of tulips? Should we be threatened over a car in the driveway for too long? Hell, do we actually care if someone puts up colorful Christmas lights?" Laughter and nods of agreement followed. It was time for change. Over the next few weeks, the HOA underwent a complete transformation. Gone were the absurd mandates, the trash can fines, the flower color restrictions, the holiday decoration limits. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community again. Karen, however, faced far greater problems. Her legal troubles piled up. On top of the obstruction charge, the Mitchell family sued her for delaying medical care. The city fined her heavily for blocking public roads. And, in a final, poetic twist, the new HOA board turned its attention to her own property. Her unregistered shed? Fined. Her mailbox color? Fined. Her fence? Ordered to be taken down. Karen fought back, of course. She filed a lawsuit against the HOA, claiming she had been unfairly targeted. She even tried to sue the Mitchells for defamation. The cases were laughed out of court. With no allies left, Karen had no choice but to sell her house and move. But karma wasn't done with her yet. When she applied to another HOA-run community, her name had already made the rounds. The board took one look at her application and politely informed her that there were no vacancies. Back in the neighborhood she once ruled, things had never been better. To celebrate, Jack organized a block party, something that would have been impossible under Karen's reign. Families gathered, kids rode bikes freely, and for the first time in years, neighbors laughed without fear of a clipboard-wielding tyrant lurking around the corner. Then, in the middle of the festivities, a moving truck slowly rolled down the street. At the wheel, looking utterly defeated, was Karen. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. She just kept driving, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. And just like that, she was gone. But one question remains: what would you do if someone like Karen controlled your neighborhood? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.